Good evening, everyone. Oh, for those of you who know me, I don't usually go on the stage. I just talk down there. But tonight, as your host, I have to go on the stage. Hi, welcome to Southampton Arts Center. Hi, Tish. I'm Amy Kirwin. I'm the artistic director here at this lovely institution. Thank you all for coming. How many of you came to our first Raconteurs Evening? Nice. We have a couple of alums in the hizzy. That's house for the cool people. Ruby Jackson and Nanachka Deck are here. Patton Miller. We got a lot of veterans out there. And then we have some new ones who came last time and are now tonight's storytellers. So this program is just a old-fashioned storytelling, bare bones, microphone, blank stage minus a piano, lights, nothing else, no notes, nothing, just telling a story, pure and simple. Most importantly about tonight is I want to say that it is made possible thanks to the wonderful Pat Sanders here in the audience. She has generously sponsored the program, and so thank you so much to Pat, who's always a wonderful support here, not just with this, but all the time, so we really appreciate you. Thank you so much. Yay. So I don't have a whole lot to say in advance. I'll be talking all night, but just a reminder that I hope you had a chance to look at the exhibition. Hi, Lynn. Paint Your World, the 40-year retrospective of Michael Paraskevas, who's sitting right here in the front row. Congratulations, Mickey. So fittingly, he will also be telling a secret this evening, because that is the theme tonight, secrets, whether somebody's own secret or another secret. And please do see the show if you didn't get a chance beforehand, and it's up through November 10th, so do come back and tell your friends. We have a lot of programs coming up, so if you're not on our mailing list, please sign up. Our new brochure will be hitting mailboxes very soon, so check for that. So if you're not on our mailing list, too late because the list has already gone to the printer, but you can put it on the list anyway and we'll send you one. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first storyteller tonight, who is a very, very fantastic dancer. If you haven't been to any of our dance parties, either silent or otherwise, Greg Monske can really cut a rug. And he loves to dance, and he's quite the character. So ladies and gentlemen, the very charismatic Greg Monske.
You're asking me to live up to a lot there, Amy.
Sorry.
I want to thank Amy, actually, for inviting me here tonight. When we first talked about it, you were like, hey, Greg, you want to tell a story? Like, September's secrets and October's lies. And I'm like, every story I got falls into one of those two categories. So I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. So it's, this is a story about a practical joke gone awry. And so I actually looked it up in the dictionary, practical joke, and it's like, a victim who, a joke perpetrated on them for the purpose of humor and embarrassment and confusion. And I'm like, that fits about everything I did to this person. And so I'm like, all right. And then it says, of course, the person that performs this is a practical joker. But like if you asked, anybody that was the victim, what their dictionary definition of practical joker would be, it'd probably be like asshole or something. So anyway, the story starts in Mystic Seaport in Connecticut. Everybody knows it's a famous historic seaport that has a bunch of old moldy ships that you can walk on. But more importantly, they have a gift shop. And I am like a big fan of gift shops. I'm telling you, like if any place has a gift shop, I gotta go. I mean, if there was an auto junkyard that had a little sign that said gift shop and we were driving by, I'd be like, maybe we should stop for a few minutes, and see what they got. So there in the glass case of the gift shop was a plastic container of 3 arrowheads, obviously machine manufactured arrowheads for $3. So I bought them and brought them home here to Southampton. And at the time I was living on an estate, and this was like one of the last historic dying styles of estate care. where it was like 17 acres in Southampton, and we were producing and propagating everything on the estate for the estate. We had 4 greenhouses, 8 cold frames, a half-acre cutting garden, and we had about 15 yards of composted soil that we would regenerate every year. And this is important to the story, but so anyway, what happened is I thought, and at the same time, I had a guy working for me that loved all things 1700s and 1600s, including arrowheads. And so I thought, okay, we'll be potting up some stuff in the potting shed, and I pull out this arrowhead, and I'll just throw it into the soil. And so I toss it into the soil, and I'm like, oh my God, look, an arrowhead. And I pull it out, and I'm like, Roger's next to me. Roger, are you here this evening? I was going to have to change my story if Roger... Anyway, so I have this arrowhead, and Roger's not paid attention. He's like distracted somehow, and I'm like, he obviously doesn't care, so I throw it back into the soil. Okay, so what happens is the soil drops into a bucket at the bottom of the potting shed, goes out to a pile at number 3 greenhouse, and they get mixed into the compost, 15 yards of compost, into a pile, and then gets recycled for the next season. So, what I also didn't realize was that every couple of days a week, Roger would show up at 7 o'clock in the morning with his breakfast and a newspaper, and then he would go out, because when we would sift the soil for preparation for planting things, we had a big screen. It would catch all the debris, and then we'd, flip it over into this big pile of debris. I didn't realize Roger every couple of days would go and sift through the debris, thinking that he was going to find some artifact. Okay, so 8 months goes by. This was like in October, so now it's like May, and I come out to the greenhouse, and here's Roger. I walk into the greenhouse, and he's like, I knew it! And he's standing like this, and he's like, showing it to me. I knew I would find something. He like holds it up to God. He's like, I knew this was happening. It just took a while, and immediately I recognized the machine-made arrowhead. But now, 8 months later, it had a really nice patina on it. So I'm looking at this arrowhead, and I am looking at Roger's happiness, and I got caught up in Roger's happiness. Seriously, it's like, I can't tell him. He's so happy. I am so happy for Roger. I can't tell him that it's fake. So I go in at the end of and all day long he's talking about arrowheads and, things he has and what he's dug up. And I go into the house, and my wife's there, and I'm like, Faye, you wouldn't believe what happened. Roger found that arrowhead that I totally forgot about 8 months ago that I threw back in the compost pile. He just found it. She's like, you got to tell him. You're going to tell him, right? You're going to tell him. You told him, right? And I'm like, he was so happy, and I was so happy. I was so happy for him, I couldn't tell him. So she's like, you got to tell him. You got to tell him tomorrow. And I'm like, okay, no problem. So I go out the next day, and Roger's like, oh, man, check this out. And he unbuttons his shirt, and here he made this necklace. And it was pretty nice. It was a pretty nice necklace. It was leather, and it had a couple beads on it, and, the arrowhead was like right there. It was pretty nice. And he's like, I got a friend of mine that's on vacation right now. She's an archaeologist, and she's coming back in 5 days. And I'm like, okay, I got 5 days to work this out. I'm like, before she gets back. And so, he's going on and how great it was. And again, I was happy for him. He was happy. And I couldn't do anything. And so I go back in. After I actually lived on the estate, so all I had to do was like walk 30 feet from the greenhouse to my house. And so I walk back in the kitchen, and my wife is like, so you told him, right? And I'm like, well, he was so happy. Oh, and by the way, he just made this necklace. And so my wife's pose is like this now. And it's like, you got to tell him. You got to tell, hand on the hip. This is how I visualize this. Hand on the hip, pointing at me. You got to tell him this. You got to tell him. I'm like, yeah, this has gone on too long. And I'm like, yep, you're right. I'll tell him tomorrow. And so I go out the next day, and, Roger, looks really tired, and he's like kind of exhausted. And he unbuttons his shirt, and he's like, check this out. And he'd stayed up all night and redid the necklace. And now the necklace has like the sinew of a raccoon that was killed on the side of the road, where he pull the guts out of it and dried them, and it's got glass beads and pieces of leather. And then, I mean, it's a big, let's see, it had turkey feathers. It was huge. It was like this. And then it had crow claws on the sides of it coming in to like point right at that beautiful machine-made, arrowhead right in the middle. And like at that point, I'm like, there's no way I can tell him, it's impossible. There's no way. So I'm like, I still got 3 days before, his archaeologist friend shows up. What am I going to do? And so at this point, again, I go in to the wrath of my wife. And at the same time, my children have been listening to this every day, and they're like 8 and 6 years old. And, the whole time they're hearing this story, they're just like, wow, oh. And so it's like, okay, we're going to resolve this the next day. I go out at 8 o'clock to the greenhouse. Roger's not to be found. On the potting shed table is his necklace, ripped, and I can just see it. I could see the whole event where he rips it off of his throat and throws it against the table. I mean, literally, it seemed to me as though the cloud of hatred was dissipating from it, and it had just fallen off the edge of the back wall, and there was still like this ghost shadow of this necklace where he had slammed it against the wall there. And I'm like, oh my God, he knows. And it took me a while to find him. He was out in the back somewhere, back 17. And, one-word answers to every sentence that, I had for him, and I was really sorry, and blah, 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 blah. And, then I go, at the end of the day, I walk in and find out that, my 8-year-old daughter on her way to the bus at 7 o'clock that morning happened to stop Roger and tell him how sorry she was that the arrowhead that he had was fake. So what I couldn't do in 3 days, my 8-year-old daughter did in about 10 seconds. And that's my story.
Thank you, Greg. I'll scrutinize anything you might give me in the future and hesitate to show it to my jeweler, who I don't have anyway, because I'm not that fancy. Thank you. That was such a fun story. Thank you for sharing. So next up, we have the wonderful Brenda Simmons, who I'm sure a lot of you know from Southampton. She is a uber local, and she is the executive director of Southampton African American Museum, and she has a really wonderful family tale to tell you today. So everybody, Brenda Simmons.
I was born and raised here in Southampton, and my parents, Pearl Simmons, was from Virginia, and my dad, Noah Simmons, was from Currituck, North Carolina. And they were part of what they called the Great Migration. And they came out from the South to the North for a better life. And they both ended up in New York City, Harlem, USA. And they dated. I loved watching the pictures, the black and white pictures that they have of them in the park. And my dad was all dressed up with a suit and a hat, and my mom looked so elegant. And eventually, one of my aunts came out to Southampton, and so did my dad. So my mom followed, and lo and behold, they got married. And my dad's nickname was Crook, and my mom's name is Pearl. And I always love telling this little story. They always had a little saying, Crook stole the pearl. So anyway, my dad and my mom lived out here, and my dad was always he only had 8th grade education, but he was a very, very smart and a very good businessman. So he had a lot of businesses. He had his own landscaping business. And my dad, though, was kind of standoffish a lot. And finally, one day, I tried to figure out what the heck was going on. I started asking my little aunts and tried to find out what's going on. And believe it or not, he ended up telling me himself. He said that when he was growing up, I think he was maybe, he said like 8 or 9, he kept seeing this picture of this woman in his mom's room, this beautiful woman in his mom's room. So he kept asking her, Mom, who's that woman? Who's that woman? Who's that woman? Who's that woman? Finally, because he was a pain in the ass, she finally told him that your mother had died and that was your mom. But meantime, the mother and the father he thought was his mom and dad was his grandparents. So needless to say, it kind of messed him up a little bit. And he ended up telling me that's why he was really kind of like a badass, and he would switch from one family to the other, to the other, to the other. But it helped me to understand, because me and my dad's relationship wasn't that great, but it helped me to understand why he kind of used alcohol, too, to numb the pain. But past that, my dad owned a landscaping business, and he was never home much. And he was always seemed like to be in East Hampton somewhere. And I kept figuring out, where the heck is he? Where the heck is he? So lo and behold, not about a year ago, my sister and I were talking, and we were saying that, debating whether my father owned this restaurant or he just cooked there. And I said, I think he was just a cook. My sister said, no, he owned it. So I Googled his name, Noah T. Simmons, and I put next to it Cottage Inn. And lo and behold, this book comes up, Hotter Than a Matchstick by Steve Boone. I said, that's a fluke. But meantime, I was curious. I went to Amazon and I opened the book up, and lo and behold, you can read part of the book, as you know, you can do that. And I read part of it. It said something about Noah T. Simmons, a transplant from New Jersey, helped a skinny white band play, and the names was the Kingsmen. And I kept looking further, and Kingsman's was the original name, but they changed their name to the Loving Spoonfuls. I was ecstatic. I said, oh my God. I called my sister, I said, you're not gonna believe this, you're not gonna believe this. I said, really? I said, Daddy, you were right, he did own it. So I got the book, I got it like in 2 days, was reading the book. And she calls me about a week later, she says, guess what? I looked up Stephen Boone, and I got him on the phone. He wants to talk to you. I was like, what? So Stephen Boone is the guitarist for, and maybe people know that, for the Loving Spoonfuls. So I called him. We became like best friends almost, basically, instantly. He kept saying, what's up? What a wonderful thing my dad did. How they actually, my dad gave him that first kind of start down at East Hampton. And it was basically a segregated area in the Springs during that time. And of course, the audience that my dad had at the restaurant was mainly all black. And he said, Stephen kept emphasizing that your dad gave us the greatest opportunity. And not only that, we played to an all-black group, and they were like so receiving of us. He said it was so great. And they said by the end of the summer, there was the elites, summer elites, and the locals all dancing together. So it was just so cool. So the ended up basically was, they ended up playing, I don't know if anybody knew, the Loving Spoonfuls was in Suffolk Theater in Riverhead last year. And so Stephen calls me, he says, look, I got some front row tickets for you. Come. I hadn't really met him, just on the phone. So I get there, and I see this guy come out from the stage, and I'm sitting in the front. He had me front row seats, and he's mouthing to me, are you Brenda? I'm like, are you Steve? He said, yes. So I go up to the stage. We couldn't hug because of the distance of the stage, but we greeted, and I sat back down, and he went to introduce, he opened up the act, and he was saying thank you to the people who owned the place and invited him. He recognized his brother and family members, etc. And then he said, I have a very, very special guest here. And he began to talk about my dad and how they gave him the opportunity and all that. It was just a wonderful thing. And I'm sitting there, he said, but I have a very, very, very special guest here. He said, I have her daughter here. Her name is Brenda Simmons. And everybody applauded, blah, 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 blah. But I'm going to end and say, the start of my relationship with my dad wasn't that great, but to know that he's leaving this wonderful, wonderful legacy is just wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. And I think you told us earlier that not only did the Lovin' Spoonfuls play at the Cottage Inn, but when your dad was the owner also, and you're like, I forgot. Let's see, who did you say? Dinah Washington, James Brown, Ike and Tina Turner, and Brenda and her sister, you said, used to play on that stage and probably like rolled in the spit of Ike or something. I hope you had your tetanus. All right, good. Thank you, Brenda, for sharing that. It's such a sweet story. Yay! Next up, we have a master magician, Allan Kronzek, who some of you may have been to his program earlier this summer, Magical Jews, History and Mystery, and it was a really incredible program. And Allan is a wonderful presenter. And he also wandered here many times over the winter during our takeover exhibition that his lovely wife Ruby was part of to do his close-up illusionism. So if you have a chance to see one of his tricks up close, it's pretty spooky and impressive. So anyway, Allan is also an author. He's written many books, including his most recent, Grandpa Magic. And so give a very warm welcome to Allan Kronzek.
Good. At the age of 9, I received a wonderful gift. It was an A.C. Gilbert Misto magic set. I opened the lid, and it was as if I was being sucked inside, like a special effect from a Harry Potter movie. I was drawn to everything in it, all the physical props, the fantasies of power, the role-playing, and even the illustration of the boy on the box, a kid my age wearing a jacket and tie and sleeves jauntily rolled up, holding a magic wand, ready to amaze. I liked that kid. And I also like the secrets. I love the secrets, the clever gimmicks and the cool principles and all the tricks of the trade that, in order to work their magic on an audience, must remain secret. It said that in the instruction booklet. A magician never reveals his secrets. Now, my parents were very supportive of my fascination with magic, and that's because of another secret. This was a family secret, and it was this, that even though I appeared to be a normal 9-year-old boy, that, like a magic trick, was a false appearance. I wasn't normal at all. This was discovered during a routine physical before going off to summer camp when the doctor heard a strange whooshing sound through his stethoscope. It was a heart murmur. He was alarmed. My parents were alarmed. I saw one specialist after another, and eventually we wound up in Baltimore, Maryland at Johns Hopkins Hospital, where I was seen by the premier pediatric cardiologist in the world, Dr. Helen Tausig, and her crew. And over a period of a few days, I was subjected to the most awful battery of tests. In my memory, the worst is being forced to drink what seemed to be gallons of barium out of paper cups to illuminate your insides for a fluoroscope. But equally awful was the catheterization and the dye test and the x-rays and the blood work and all the other awful, awful tests. And the end result was this. The kid's got problems. An enlarged heart, a wacky EKG, that whooshing heart murmur. I was forbidden to take gym, forbidden to dive into a swimming pool, forbidden to exert myself in any way, forbidden to ride a roller coaster. And with that, we were sent home and told to come back in 6 months for more of the same, which we did for several years. Now, I think you can understand what a wonderful counterbalance magic provided to all the things I was forbidden to do, and why my parents were so supportive, because here was something I was actually good at and got recognition for. And so, if I upheld my end of the bargain, which was to take daily doses of prophylactic penicillin, drink lots of milk, and not exert myself, I would be rewarded with a trip to Rigau's House of Enchantment. This was Pittsburgh's only magic shop, and it was owned by a wonderful man named James Swoger, whose name spelled backwards was Rigau's, which naturally gave me the idea of perhaps becoming the amazing Kesnork. I thought better of it. So my dad would take me there every month or so, and I would make Jim, this poor patient man, show me one thing after another. What are those tubes up there, Mr. Swoger? What do they do? How about that wooden duck with the cards? Oh, the linking rings. I read about the linking rings. Can you show me those? And he did. And after about an hour or so, we would spend some bucks and buy a piece of apparatus, and Jim would teach me the secret, and I'd go home and practice and add it to my repertoire and eventually add it to my act, which was coming along. But the truth of the matter is that I didn't uphold my end of the bargain at all. I cheated a lot. For one thing, my initial response to this whole medical ordeal, which must have been terrifying, was denial and rebellion. For one thing, I didn't experience any physical symptoms other than shortness of breath, which I lied about, and occasional chest pains, which I also lied about. But other than that, no symptoms. My daily mantra was, there's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with me. Two acts of rebellion stand out. The first took place at a summer camp. Now I'm 10 or 11, standing on a dock at the edge of the lake, ready to take my deep water swimming test, which required that I dive headfirst into the lake. There's no way I should have been in that line. It was in my records, no diving. I took a deep breath. I knew I was going to go in. The only question was, would I ever come up? I did. The second incident was several years later. I was 17, a freshman at Carnegie Tech in the drama department, and the letter came from Johns Hopkins, time for your semi-annual checkup. And this time, I refused to go. It had finally dawned on me that all these visits were nothing more than them updating their file and parading me in front of a new batch of doctors and interns. So I said, no more, I'm done. I walked away, and that was it. The whole heart business eventually faded away with no repercussions, and the magic continues to evolve. But there was one more secret yet to be revealed. After I'd written my first magic book, The Secrets of Alcazar, I obtained from Johns Hopkins my complete medical file. And inside, I discovered the doctor's true assessment of my condition as a young boy. And that was that the prognosis was dire, that I could die at any moment, and that there was nothing to be done about it. So an ethical question arose. Do we tell the parents, knowing that this information would only cause more grief? Or do we keep it a secret? And I think they made the right decision, which was to keep it a secret, withhold it from the family, until I found out. And that was quite a shocker. So what's the moral of the story? Magic is good medicine, denial is good, lie to your doctors. I'm not sure, but I can give you at least one takeaway, which is sometimes a magician does reveal his secrets. Thanks.
Allan, I could hear that story like 50 more times, and I've already heard it like 6 already, and I love it so much. Thank you. Where's my wallet? At this point in the evening, I feel the need to share one of my little secrets, which is that I was a 5-year-old kleptomaniac. Picture it in the Safeway in Lafayette, California. I don't know do you know Safeway, the supermarket? And do you remember those big like Brock's candy displays that were like so enticing? Clearly to like chubby 5-year-old me, very enticing. And I remember there was always this one candy in there. It was like a chocolate-covered, gooey-centered thing. It was like big. It was the biggest one, because of course you want the biggest one, obviously. So it always like drew me to it. So I was at the Safeway with my dad, and he was somewhere, not with me. I was somehow by myself at 5 in front of this massive Brock's candy display, which now would probably be very tiny, but it was then huge. Not that it is around anymore, but here I am in front of this display, and I'm thinking, you just lift it and take one, like who's gonna notice, right? So I look around, looking around everywhere. I don't see anybody at all. So I take my little chubby hand and I reach in and grab a few of those delicious chocolate nougaty filled things and just kind of gingerly stick them in my pocket. Shortly thereafter, this large man walks over to me and looks down at me and says, "What are you doing?" And very, very cleverly at 5, I have to say, I don't know that I've done better than this with a line so quickly, but I looked up at him and I said, I was just seeing if they would fit. Totally true. Pete, have I told you this story before, my husband? I have, yes. So mortified, I ran to the checkout where I found my dad, and I grabbed his leg in terror and looked up at him to find that it was not my dad. And that was especially mortifying. I found him, and I didn't go to, candy jail. I just kind of went on with my life. But like many things that I know the root of the cause of my phobias or this, I know that I am very, very afraid of getting in trouble or caught doing anything bad because of that stinking candy incident. So that is my story for tonight. Thank you. Next up, we have Stefanie Sacks. She is a culinary nutritionist and an author, a radio personality, many other wonderful things. And she is sharing a very personal story with us tonight, so please show a lot of love and applause for Stefanie Sacks.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Brenda, for holding my hand. That's going to be the funniest thing I say. So I am a culinary nutritionist, the author of What the Fork Are You Eating? And I'm a nourishment warrior. My passion for clean food and food and healing began at a young age. It was in the 1980s. I was a teenager. And I came to it, if you read my book, I don't expect that you did, but I came to it because I was super sick as a kid. I had terrible allergies, asthma, recurring bronchitis, pneumonia, and doctors kept drugging me, and I kept getting sicker. So I'm an Aries. I decided to take my health into my own hands. That's the truth. In 2014, my book came out, and life was a whirlwind for several years. Not only was I doing that whole book thing and working, I'm also a mom to 2 boys who are now almost 11 and 14. I had the great chance to meet with this man in media who I so admire. And I was up at a conference when I met him, and we had lunch. And he grabbed my hands, and he said, "Stefanie, your book is wonderful, but what's all the angst coming from?" I sat in utter disbelief. How did he see my angst, and what was I going to say? In a split-second decision that was filled with fear, anger, and shame, I decided to share my secret. It was the 1970s. It's very hard for me not to move when I tell this story, so I'm going to stand here, and I may jiggle a little bit, but it was the 1970s, and the house was red brick, black shutters, and white trim, and it sat on a petite manicured lawn. My paternal grandparents' house was a stone's throw away from Temple Beth Sholem, so my grandparents could walk to shul on the Sabbath. My parents were stuck between my father's Orthodox Judaism and my mother's Jews who also celebrate Christmas upbringing, and I was the scapegoat for their confusion. I hated temple. Religion felt wrong, super uncomfortable for me. I didn't know why. So my grandparents' house, it smelled of Pine Sol and Mr. Clean. And even when my grandmother cooked, cleaning solution permeated the air. It was a male-dominated house, my father, the eldest of 3, and my grandfather, the Judaic patriarch, at the helm. We spent the Jewish holidays there, we spent the Sabbath there, and when my parents went into the city, they would drop me off at my grandparents' for an overnight. From as early as I can remember, I had night terrors. And my mom, at home, would sit in the rocking chair in my room and sing a lullaby, just be there so I could feel her presence so I could fall to sleep. But at my grandparents' house, I tiptoed across the hallway, and I went into the bedroom where my grandmother lay sleeping and my grandfather lay awake watching TV in 2 twin beds that were pushed together to make a king. And I would crawl into bed next to my grandfather so he could hold my little body next to his to give it comfort. What happened after that? Well, at the age of 14, memories came back. I didn't realize that was what was repeatedly happening was wrong. He was my grandfather. He was safe. By 17, I mustered the strength to tell my parents. My confession was met with disbelief, anger, rage, shaming, blaming. We continued to spend the Jewish holidays with my perpetrator. The only thing that changed was that I started to crumble from the inside out. I was cast out as insane. I went insane. Thank God for my maternal grandmother, who passed away nearly 2 years ago at the age of 98. When I was going through her things, I found stacks and stacks of note cards and letters and birthday cards that I had written her since the age of 10, the 1970s. And at the end of each one, I wrote, "Please don't worry about me. I'm okay." Funny enough, is she knew something that I didn't, way back when, I guess. But she offered a safe haven, a place where I could be myself without judgment. She offered unconditional love and support, and she fostered my innate love of cooking and taught me what nourishment is, as I know it today. In 1986, I got a job as a cook at Naturally Good in Montauk, where we would summer. I became obsessed with clean eating because I felt so dirty, which is a byproduct, unfortunately, of abuse. I gained an incredible set of knowledge and skills that launched my healing and my learning as I know it today. After college, excuse me one second. After college, I worked in PR and marketing, food. I went to culinary school. I went to graduate school. I got married. I had children. I built a practice, all with my grandmother's unwavering love and support. And while I was also doing that, I was feverishly trying to heal, figure out why I was in so much pain. You see, I was taught to forgive and forget. That's what I was told. So I thought that that was what I was supposed to do. Doctors, therapists, healers, books read, you name it, I did it. I couldn't work fast enough. I couldn't work hard enough. But what I needed to learn was how to be gentle with myself. And so I hit pause. Let's call it divine intervention. But 3 years ago, I went to my first 12-step meeting, adult children of alcoholics. I don't drink. I don't do drugs. But you see, I grew up with parents who did. And this opened a door to a new set of healing. And I embarked on a 12-week program for survivors of childhood sexual abuse called Hidden Water New York City. I was ready to change my story. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk is one of the world's leading authorities on PTSD. And in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, he says that traumatized children are 50 times more likely to have asthma than their non-traumatized peers. There was finally science to prove that a cascade of stress hormones wreaks physical and emotional havoc on a body. On top of that, there was also evidence now to prove that childhood trauma impacts normal, healthy development without the proper support of any child. I was validated. So what have I learned? God, so much. I could just sit here and list it, but I won't. I will tell you this. I'm learning to embrace my story, and sharing it with you is part of the process. It could have turned out very different for me. I could have turned to drugs, alcohol. I could have been a prostitute. I could have passed the abuse down, or hey, I could have taken my own life. Believe me, it occurred to me on multiple occasions. Instead, I lived with terrible allergies, asthma, recurring bronchitis, pneumonia. At 12, I was anorexic. As a teenager, I was a bulimic. In my 20s, I was diagnosed as bipolar. My parents finally had a reason for my insanity. Lucky them. And I bought it. But see, a funny thing happened. I went on medication for about 10 years. And I worked with some amazing people. And this support system that I was building didn't believe that I was bipolar. And I happened on some research about something called complex PTSD, and that oftentimes people with complex PTSD, meaning children who have been traumatized a multitude of times, are misdiagnosed as bipolar. I brought this research to my doctor, and together we made the decision. February will be 8 years that I've been off my medication. So today, I live with an autoimmune disease, a renal disease, and its inherent complications. I still have asthma, but I'll take this shit over any of the other options. I have to be on top of my healing to keep it real, for me personally, as a mom, and in my work. And also so I can embody the authenticity and integrity in those that I so admire. But still, no matter how hard I work, if I smell Pine Sol or Mr. Clean, I'm triggered. And it's not fun, but I'm human. So a client once said to me, you know, Stefanie, I know you're a culinary nutritionist, but you're really so much more. You use food as a conduit to deep healing. Yes, I do. And I am a woman, a mother, a wife, a survivor, and I am sane. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefanie. Thank you. Great job, Stefanie. Just to move on from that and have our next presenter, who is known as the au pair lady to many, or also everyone's favorite aunt. Sima Freierman came to our last Raconteurs Evening, and our first, and came up to me after and said, I want to do that. And she kept at it, and when we learned that decided that the theme would be secrets, it worked out that she did in fact have a really, really great story about a family secret of her own. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Sima Freierman.
Okay. Well, in 1980, shortly after I was 33, my mother called me and said, we have to talk. This was nothing unusual. My mother and I probably talked 460, maybe 478 times a year, because some topics were much too important for just one conversation. We were very, very close, except for a brief time when she bashed my husband-to-be. This was years later. I called her from Florida. I said, Mom, I'm with Rob, I'm pregnant, we're gonna get married, I'm so happy. And I waited for my mother's response. Now, this was the days before email, so my mother's response took the form of 4 handwritten pages on yellow legal pad paper. And I got this nice plump little envelope, and I couldn't wait to open it. I was so excited, and I opened the envelope, and I cried for 4 days. Because my mother wanted to know, how could you let him touch you? Who is this guy? This is all wrong. I don't approve. Well, in all fairness to my mother, she did come to love my husband before he passed away at a young age. He was a good man, and he was a wonderful father. And I made peace with my mother. In fact, the last time I saw my mother, we were cleaning my brother's clock in a card game on Fire Island. If you meet a woman my age, or maybe younger, who has not made peace with her mother, she is fucked up-ed. Ladies, make peace with your mother before it's too late. So anyway, she called me in 1980, said, we have to talk. I said, sure, Mom, what's up? I have to see you in person. I said, Mom, you all right? She said, it's not my health, and it's not about money, but I have to see you in person. I said, okay. Now, at that time, I lived on West 76th Street. She lived on East 15th Street. I put on my high heels and sailed forth to walk New York, which is what I did in those days. Now, they weren't stilettos, but they were decently high heels. And went down to East 15th Street, came to her apartment, came in and said, okay, Mom, what's up? The suspense is killing me. She said, you have to sit down. Okay, I sat down. I said, what's up, Mom? She said, you have a brother. I said, Mom, I have two brothers. I have an older brother and a younger brother. No, she said, you have another brother. He was born 18 months after you, and we gave him up for adoption. Now she had my attention. And the very first thought that came to my mind was my father, who had died 13 years earlier. I said, well, what about Dad? What did he say about this? Where was Dad when this happened? What kind of thing, what did Dad have to say? What Dad had to say was a secret that my mother took to her grave, because she could never give us a clear answer on what Dad had to say. And I remembered that a few years earlier, when the family friend Ethel died, my mother said, Ethel took our secret to her grave. Now, at the time, I really didn't care what secrets Ethel took to her grave. It was a family friend, but I remembered at that moment, that was the secret. Somehow Ethel found out about my parents giving up a child for adoption, and she took that secret to her grave. So now it was time for us to meet my adopted brother, Robert. And we decided all the siblings would meet him together at a restaurant. The thought being that, you bring us to a restaurant, we're going to be on our best behavior. Now, Freiermans, on their very best behavior, step on each other's lines, tell the funniest joke, or so we think, shout at one another. There's a St. Bernard sitting there. My brothers do some weird thing with their wrists all the time. We're very loud. And Robert, with his wife merrily at his side, fit right in, which caused me to wonder how Robert ever fit right in with the Huntington Townhouse bar mitzvah crowd where he had grown up. Well, it turned out he didn't fit right in there. He had a Freierman sense of humor, even though his last name was Schiffman. So now we were six. Instead of a very neat older sister, older brother, me right in the middle, younger brother, younger sister, now we were six. There were 3 older siblings. I was the youngest of the oldest. And there were 3 younger siblings, and Robert was the oldest of the youngest. So there were consequences to this secret. My 2 brothers, my existing brothers as I like to think, both got divorced that year. Probably the thought of another Freierman brother on the scene was more than their wives could take. In fact, one of the sisters-in-law, when she heard that Beverly and Homer were giving up a child for adoption, she said, oh, I wish it was Sima. But they got divorced. My older sister, who was 5 when my mother was pregnant with Robert, she knows after all these years, she knew that mother was having a baby, and she repressed it, and she carries the guilt to all these years because she was a very bright 5-year-old. She had to know. On Robert's 50th birthday, I wrote him a long, sweet card saying how I had missed. I was sorry I missed growing up with him. I would have loved an Irish twin in our Jewish family. And all 3 of the older siblings at one point or another said to our shrink, we didn't all have the same shrink, we each said to our shrink, when we gave Robert away, and fortunately we each had a shrink who was wise enough to say, no, you didn't give Robert away, your parents gave Robert away, and they probably had good reason. Well, they did. We were dirt poor, we were living in the boonies, and to their credit, they went on to have 2 children, and they kept both of them. Robert was one of the eulogizers at my mother's funeral, and he pointed to the front row where all the siblings sat and all the nieces and nephews sat, and most of the nieces and nephews came along after Robert did. And he said, when I became a searcher, an adoptee who's looking for his biological family, when I became a searcher, Beverly could have said no. She could have said, no, I do not want you in my life now. Please go away. But she didn't. She opened her house, her home, her family, my family to me. She gave me this whole family, and for that I will always be grateful. And, said Robert, the minute Beverly walked into the room, I understood where I got my energy. Well, last year we had a ×5 birthday. 60-year-old, 65-year-old, 70-year-old, 75-year-old. And we had, for the first time, a family reunion, all together, all of Beverly and Homo's offspring. So there were the 6 siblings with respective mates, and the 12 cousins, many of them with respective mates, and there were 3 grandchildren, too. And to all the cousins, Robert is just another goofy uncle who's trying to see who's the funniest and who's the coolest. The cousins really know that Aunt Sima is the funniest and the coolest. And there at our family reunion, on September 15th, for the first time ever as a family, we sang Happy Birthday to Robert on his 70th birthday.
Thank you, Sima. Our final raconteur of the evening is, we saved the man of the hour for the end because it is Mickey Paraskevas, whose exhibition, Paint Your World, as I mentioned, is on view. Mickey, or Michael Paraskevas, as he's known professionally, is 40 years of his work out there. You see he's a children's book illustrator and author. He is a painter. He is a dance cover genius. He's many covers of dance papers and stories. Anyway, he's got a lot of wonderful stories to tell, and he's going to share one of those with us tonight. So to wrap it up, Mickey Paraskevas.
I'll look this up. So, thank you, Amy. The show was a lot of work, and I thank this museum for giving me the opportunity to be here. This is a funny story. You should never start a story off by telling you that it's funny, but I'll say that anyway, but it is a funny story. But it requires a slight little background. My mother, as some of you who know me very well know that, a round of applause for my mom, but people who know me really well know that my life was tied to my mom's for years and years. We did 23 books together. We did 3 television shows. We lived together. I lived with my parents for their whole lives. And we worked every day together. We wrote scripts, we wrote books, we laughed, and we had just our whole lives were wrapped up together. And which made me not a very good boyfriend to my current wife. I think I've apologized to my wife endlessly for this, but my mother sadly passed away in 2010. And I finally, through a period of time that was not very good, I finally decided I should get married, and Maria and I got married. So Maria, and this is the part of the story that's odd, Maria grew up on a farm, and my mother-in-law has feral cats. And I used to, right before we got married, I would go over to the house, and I'd sit in the living room, and I would look out the window, and I'd sit and write, and I'd be writing a book. And Maria would come in and she'd say, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm not doing anything. I'm watching these cats." And I'd sit and watch these cats for hours. And she said, "Well, get to work." And I said, "But these cats are so funny. And how many cats you got out here?" There were like 18 cats. So Then there were, some of the people would drop off cats at a farm. This was the big farm thing. So, but the cats would keep the mouse population down, and they're fascinating. It's like your own personal version. It's like Cats. It's like the musical. I said somebody already did it, but I'm watching this out the window. I said, look at the black one. He's climbing the tree, and he's friends with this one, and this one doesn't like that one. So it was kind of fascinating to watch these cats all the time. So we finally get married, and we spent a lot of time over at my mother-in-law's house, and we're driving back home one night, and my wife tells me constantly, should we get a pet? I didn't know. I didn't really want a dog. It was kind of complicated to have a dog. You got to go outside. You got to walk it. So she says, we should get feral cats. And I said, okay. Are they, she's like, they keep rid of the mice. They'll eat the mice. It's good. They were good outside. I said, well, we live on about an acre. We live in the woods, and it's near a highway, and I just felt sorry for them. I kind of felt, and she said, no. She said, the feral cats are fine. She said, they live in the woods. You get them fixed. They have a nice life. You feed them. They're great. I said, oh, let's think about it. So I can't have a cat in the house. This was the problem with the story. So she said, this is why she said, get feral. I can't have a cat in the house because when I was a kid, I was very allergic to cats, and I always kind of stayed away from them because my mother would have to call up my friends and say, does Timmy have a cat? And if Timmy had a cat, I couldn't go in the house because I would get asthma. I would get, not asthma, but I would just wheeze, and that was just horrible. So I stayed away from cats my whole life. So we're driving home one night, and she does this routine every couple of weeks. She goes, think about the cats. So I said, all right, let's think about it. I get up in the morning. I give my wife her coffee. I give her tissue. She watches the news. This is her quiet time. It's like an hour in the morning. I can't talk to her. She just has to be quiet. Just reads the news. She looks at the television, and I leave her alone. I'm in the kitchen doing stuff, and all of a sudden I hear, Mickey, come in here, Mickey. I go in. What are you doing? So she's looking out on the deck through the sliding glass doors, and there on the deck are 3 little kittens and a mama. I said, did you go get cats from the vet? And she goes, no, I didn't get them. I don't know. They just showed up. She said, now my wife, Maria, is convinced that her father, who passed away, he was a farmer, she said, this is a sign from above that my father brought these cats to us, and we're going to take care of these feral cats. I said, okay, we're cutting up hot dogs. I'm putting them outside because we didn't want the cats to run away. We wanted them to, you have to feed them in order to keep them around. So we started feeding them every day. Now, my wife, in her infinite wisdom, named the cats after characters from General Hospital. So the mother was Carly. If you all watch General Hospital, you know this. The mother's was Carly because she's kind of trampy. And then there was the black cat was named after Jason Morgan because Jason's kind of like a spine. He's like a tough guy. And then there was Spinelli. He was like the little renty guy of the group. And then the cat that's really in question here is Valentine. Now, Valentine, if you know Valentine on the show, Valentine Cassadine, has this great stare. He's like, he really looks at you. Like he's got that big, gives you that big cold stare. So I would feed the cats in the morning, and the cats would run away. They would run. And I would put the food out. I'd say, kitties, come on, eat your food. And so they would finally come and eat. But Valentine never really ran away. Valentine would run off to the side, and then Valentine would start his little staring routine at me. With the eyes, he'd be looking at me. Little kitten, right? He was a cute cat, right? But he had big eyes. I said, hi, Valentine, how are you? So this went on for months and months. And over the course of the summer, we got these cats. We decided to build them a nice little cat house. I was $1,500 later. It was like, it's got a roof, it's got walls, it's got a little window, it's got a little deck where we feed them. And, finally, this is the one day we woke up, we're looking out the window, and, oh, they're using the house. Oh, thank God, $1,500 wasn't down the drain. They're in the house, and they're living there. But I'm looking out the window, and here's Valentine looking at me from the deck of this little cat house. I'm looking at my back, and this is the cat. Little kitten. And the other ones are playing, they're running around. Oh, not Valentine. Valentine decides to jump up on a log and look in the window. Then he's looking in the deck. He's always looking at me. So my wife said, what's wrong with that cat? I said, it's like nuts. I said, I don't know. He's always looking at me. Finally, as the summer, the winter, we turned to winter. Winter was cold. Bad winter. I did feel sorry for the cats. It's, over out here, it was a cold winter. And one day in April, Valentine is gone. So I'm devastated. This poor little cat. He's gone. He doesn't show up. Day after day, I'm waiting for this cat to show up. The other cats come, I feed them. I go, but Valentine's gone. Finally, 10 days, we counted this. We had a little log. We were kind of counting. And then a lot of people, Maria was she wasn't really cold about it, but she was like, that farm attitude. Oh, it's a feral cat. Maybe it got run over by a car. He probably ran off. Maybe somebody else is feeding it. Who knows? It's like a cat. I said, no, but this was the cat that looked in the window. This is, all of a sudden, 10 days later, in a pouring rainstorm, comes the cat back. Now, the cat is wet. The cat's got a cut eye, and his paw is cut, and his foot is swollen. He's got a big swollen foot, and he's looking in the window. And he looks really thin, because this cat was getting a little fat. So this cat looked like emaciated, and I was like, oh my God, Valentine, oh my God, what's wrong? He's like, he puts his little paw up on the window, like this. I put my little paw, give him a high five. Oh, cat's back. So I said to Maria, oh, now what are we going to do? She goes, listen, he won't run away if we go. We got to get him fixed because he's a kitten, but let's get him fixed. We trap him finally. Very difficult to trap. We get him in a cage and we take him to the vet, get him his shots, and we get him the old, snip. It's a boy cat. It's a snip. We had to get him fixed because when they're fixed, they don't run off as much. This is the whole big thing about cats. So I said to the vet, "Can I bring this? What are we going to do with this cat?" And he said, "You're going to let him go? You're going to leave him outside?" I said, "Okay." So then Maria and I were talking. We said, "Oh, I can't bring this cat out. I could not let this cat outside. I felt sorry for him." She said, "But you're allergic." I said, "You know what? Maybe if we leave him in one room, like if we can get the one room." So we put him in one room in the house, and we bring him inside. Now, this cat is fine inside. All of a sudden, this cat's inside. He loves this house. He loves it inside. He was outside for 10 days with the cut paw and the eye and everything, and he's still got the little scar. He got a little scar under his eye, right? So he takes to sitting in one of this chair that's in my house. I have a Morticia Adams chair, those kind of fan chairs. It's a wicker chair, and it's painted black. And this cat is taken to sitting in this chair. So he sits in the chair, and I say, "Oh, look, he's sitting in Mom's chair." So he's like sitting there all curled up, and he's nice and everything. So I go over and pet him, and you can pet him and everything. And he saunters around the house. And so we live with him day after day. We're going on, we feed him. He's fine in the house. He doesn't rip the furniture. I thought he was going to destroy everything. But he was very calm. And then one day, I said to Maria, I was in my guest room. I have a little room for guests. And I pick up this pillow. And it's a little pillow of a cat. And my mother, if you knew my mom, was a notorious yard sailor. She loved yard sales, right? And I always put this little thing in the room. She brought this pillow home one day, and it was a pillow of a cat. And she cut the bottom of it out and put a bowl in it and sewed it, and she used it as a doorstop. Now, it's been in my house for probably 30 years, and it's a little dusty and old. And I picked this pillow up, and I showed it to my wife, and I said, "Look at this cat." So she goes, "Oh my God, it looks just like the cat." It does. It looks just like Valentine. So we put it down, we laughed about it. So then I noticed the cat likes to sit in the sink in the bathroom. And then we had dual sinks in the bathroom. My father had one sink and my mother had another. And I started taking it down. The cat's starting to sit in the sink every day. So I go over and I pet the cat. The cat look at me, give him a little pet. Loves that. Loves the little chin rub. Oh, it's cat. This cat likes me. Now, the cat kind of likes my wife, but he really likes me, So they were watching TV one night. We're watching the news. And the cat's sitting in the kind of dining room area. He's sitting under the dining room table. And the cat's looking up at the wall, like this. He's just staring at the wall. And I said to her, "Look at the cat." She looks at the cat. She goes, "Yeah." I said, "Look what the cat's looking at." So up on the wall is a painting of my father. And it's a drawing, and it's in the show. It says Time magazine. It's a man, and he's toasting. He's holding a glass up, and he's like toasting. And it's a very good drawing of my father. It looks just like my father. And here's the cat looking at the drawing. I said, "Maria," I don't want to alarm you, but do you think that cat is my mother? So she said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "The sink, the chair. He sits under the chair my mother likes. He's got the cut eye," I said. She says, "What's that story?" I said, oh, didn't you know my mother cut her cornea? And she had to go. It's the only time my mother ever went to the emergency room because she hated going to the doctors. So she calls me up one day. She goes, oh, I had to go to the emergency room. I said, you did? She said, why? So what happened? She said, I cut my eye with my fingernail. I got a big gash under my thing, and I had to go to the thing. I had to get it. So I'm looking at the cat, and the cat's got this little scar. Oh, I said, that's a little scary. And, you know, the cat will sit there, and when my wife and I bicker and over stupid stuff, and the cat, we swear the cat's like, she'll look at the cat, and she'll go, Betty, don't side with him. It's not good. And the cat looks, he watches the argument. So it's kind of nice. I don't think it's my mother all the time. I think it's kind of my mother sometimes when the cat's just eating food and, you know, doing his business in the bathroom. But every once in a while, you know, I'll read the news. I'll read Drudge to my mom. I used to read the news to my mother all the time, so I'll read the news to the cat like I used to read to my mom. And, you know, it's better than therapy. So you talk to the cat. So one day I was looking, and I found myself looking at the cat going, Bet, is that you? Are you here? Are you okay? I think my mom's okay. But I think that, and the epilogue, now the little tag on the end of the story just happened today. And I was giving a little tour to the Tuckahoe school kids came in. They're 8 years old. It's hard to, I start yakking about paintings and process, and these little kids are like, oh, you know, they want to know how, why, you know, this, and they ask me strange questions. So this one little kid takes my hand and pulls my hand, and he says, can I ask you a question? And I said, what? He goes, is your mother alive? And I kind of sometimes avoid it to little kids because I don't discuss, you know, I didn't want to say my mother died. But I looked at him and I kind of said, no, my mother died. My mother passed away about 10 years ago. And this little kid said, oh, my father died when I was 5. And I said, oh, that's so sad. I said, I'm sorry. So he says, no. He said, he said, when I'm quiet, I can still hear my father. So I said, oh, that's very sweet. And then he looked up at me and he said, well, he said, my relatives tell me that sometimes people who pass away come back as animals. So I look at this kid and I said, that's amazing. I said, because you know what? That painting of the cat right there, and he turns around, he looks at the cat. I go, that's my mom. Now, and the only other thing about this story that I'll end it with is like, if you really knew my mom, right? The fact that she would come back as a cat, which is what, because she didn't really like, because she thought I was like allergic to cats, so we've avoided them our whole lives, was that she would come back as a cat, and then she would come back as a boy cat. That was really like the thing, because my mother was not a sweet old lady. She was very tough. So that's my story.
Thank you, Mickey. I just want to call everybody back up to give a final round of applause. So Mickey Paraskevas, come on up. Come back up. Just want everybody to get a big applause. Greg Monske, come on up. Brenda Simmons, Stefanie Sacks, Sima Freierman, and Allan Kronzek. Thank you all. Great job. Thank you. Yay. Thank you. Great job. And next up in November 21st, we have Lies. So if anybody is interested in sharing a story of lies, come see me, and maybe you'll be brave enough to come up here and be one of our raconteurs November 21st. So thank you all again. Thank you to Pat Sanders for making this